Good evening, humble viewer, and welcome. It is time to let the noise of the day fall away. Settle into your chair or find your comfortable place in bed and adjust the volume so that my voice is a gentle presence in your room. The world outside can wait. For the next while, there is nothing for you to do but to breathe, to relax, and to listen. As you begin to unwind, we invite you to join our quiet community of fellow travelers. If you feel so inclined, leave a comment below, telling us where in the world you are joining us from and what time it is in your corner of the globe. There is a unique comfort in knowing that as we embark on this new journey, we are connected to others in different lands and different time zones, all seeking a measure of peace and knowledge. Tonight, we turn our attention from the damp stone of the West to the silken tapestries of the East. We are embarking on a long exploration of one of the most powerful, most revered, and most misunderstood figures in all of human history. Our subject is a person who was not merely a king or a ruler, but a deity on earth, a cosmic pivot, a man whose personal conduct was believed to influence the rain, the harvest, and the very stability of the heavens. We are going to investigate the strange and deeply weird life of the ancient Chinese emperors. We will not be focusing on grand battles or epic conquests. Instead, we will be looking inward, behind the high vermilion walls of the palace, to understand the lived reality of the Dragon Throne. It was a life of unimaginable luxury and absolute power, but it was also a life of profound isolation, crushing ritual, and terrifying paranoia. It was a life so far removed from our own, and indeed from that of any of his subjects, that it can only be described as truly bizarre. Our journey begins with the single most important concept undergirding 2 millennia of imperial rule, a concept that was both the emperor's greatest source of authority and his most terrible burden. We begin with the mandate of heaven. Before we can begin to comprehend the daily life of an emperor, the rituals he performed, the clothes he wore, the food he ate, the fears that haunted him, we must first grasp the foundational political and spiritual doctrine that gave him his power. This was the concept of Tianming, the mandate of heaven. This was not simply a Chinese version of the European divine right of kings. The divine right of a European monarch was an absolute grant from God to a specific family line. It was a statement of inherent hereditary legitimacy. The mandate of heaven was something far more complex, more profound, and ultimately more precarious. It was less of a right and more of a cosmic contract, a performance review from the universe itself, which could be revoked at any time. The concept emerged near the end of the 2nd millennium BCE, formulated by the founders of the Zhou dynasty to justify their overthrow of the preceding Shang dynasty. The Shang had ruled for centuries, but according to Zhou historians, their final rulers had become corrupt, cruel, and inept. They had lost their moral compass. The Zhou leaders needed a powerful justification for their rebellion, a way to legitimize their seizure of power. They declared that Tian, or heaven, the supreme, impersonal, and all-encompassing cosmic force, had withdrawn its sanction from the decadent Shang and bestowed it upon the virtuous leaders of the Zhou. This was a revolutionary idea. It established the principle that the right to rule was not based on noble birth alone, but on merit and moral rectitude. Let us first examine the 2 key parties in this contract. On one side, there is heaven, Tian. It is essential to understand that Tian is not a personified anthropomorphic deity like the gods of the Greek or Roman pantheon or the god of the Abrahamic faiths. It does not have a human form or personality. It is better understood as a vast, silent, and impartial cosmic principle. It is the source of all life, the embodiment of natural order, cosmic justice, and the moral law of the universe. Heaven does not speak in commandments, but its will is expressed through the patterns of nature and the events of the human world. A harmonious society and a bountiful harvest are signs of heaven's contentment. A drought, a flood, an earthquake, or a peasant uprising are signs of heaven's displeasure. On the other side of the contract is the emperor. He held the unique and awe-inspiring title of Tianzi, the Son of Heaven. This title is also easily misunderstood. He was not believed to be the literal biological offspring of the cosmic force of heaven. Rather, he He was its chosen agent, its representative, its chief executive on Earth. His role was to act as the intermediary, the axis mundi, connecting heaven above, earth below, and humanity in between. He was the single point of contact, the one man responsible for maintaining the delicate harmony between these three realms. This status elevated him far above any other mortal. He was not just a political leader, he was a high priest, a sacred figure whose every public action had cosmic significance. The terms of the contract were clear. Heaven would grant the mandate, the authority to rule, to a just and virtuous man. As the Son of Heaven, this ruler and his descendants were tasked with maintaining the well-being of the people. This meant ensuring justice, promoting prosperity, overseeing the proper rituals, and behaving with impeccable personal morality. The emperor was, in essence, the moral exemplar for all of humanity. His virtue, or lack thereof, would ripple outwards, affecting his family, his court, his bureaucracy, and ultimately the entire empire. If he ruled well, with benevolence, wisdom, and diligence, the empire would be blessed with peace, stability, and good harvests. The world would be in balance, and heaven would be content. This is what made the mandate such a powerful tool of legitimation for a ruling dynasty. As long as things were going well, the emperor could point to the peace and prosperity of the land as concrete proof that he and his dynasty still enjoyed heaven's favor. His throne was secure not just by force of arms, but by cosmic approval. Every good harvest was a vote of confidence from the universe. But here lies the terrifying corollary, the clause in the contract that haunted every emperor. The mandate was not permanent, and it was not unconditional. If an emperor and his dynasty became corrupt, if they ruled with cruelty and greed, if they neglected their ritual duties, or if they indulged in decadent and immoral behavior, heaven would show its displeasure. The signs would be unmistakable and would start small before escalating. A comet might streak across the sky, interpreted by court astrologers as a celestial warning. A local drought might occur. A monstrous animal might be born in a distant province. If the emperor failed to heed these warnings and correct his ways, the signs would grow more severe. Widespread famine, catastrophic floods of the Yellow River, devastating earthquakes, or popular rebellions, all were seen as clear evidence that the ruling dynasty had lost its virtue and, therefore, had lost the mandate of heaven. This belief had profound psychological and political consequences for the emperor. It placed him under an almost unimaginable weight of responsibility. A European king might blame a famine on a bad harvest or a flood on an act of God. For a Chinese emperor, these events were not random acts of nature. They were personal criticisms. A flood was not just a disaster, it was a cosmic judgment on his character. An earthquake was not a geological event, it was the universe shaking its head in disappointment. The emperor was held personally accountable for the proper functioning of the cosmos. Imagine the immense paranoia this would induce. The emperor would live in a state of constant anxiety, scrutinizing the world for any sign of heaven's displeasure. He would rely heavily on his court astronomers, astrologers, and diviners to interpret the portents. The discovery of a new spot on the sun, the timing of a lunar eclipse, the birth of a two-headed calf, all of these would be reported to the throne in lengthy memorials, to be anxiously pondered and debated. Upon receiving news of a disaster, an emperor was expected to engage in acts of public penance. He might issue a formal apology to heaven and to his people, acknowledging his own failings. He might fast, retreat from public life for a period of mourning, or offer lavish sacrifices at the Temple of Heaven in Beijing, a vast complex designed specifically for these crucial communications between the Son of Heaven and heaven itself. This doctrine also created a unique political dynamic within the imperial court. It empowered a certain type of official, the Confucian scholar bureaucrat. These men, steeped in the classics, saw it as their solemn duty to advise the emperor and, when necessary, to remonstrate with him, to criticize his conduct. This was an incredibly dangerous act, as the emperor held the power of life and death. But a brave official could, in theory, point to a recent drought and argue that it was a direct result of the emperor's excessive spending on palace luxuries or his promotion of a corrupt favorite. They were not just voicing a political opinion, they were claiming to interpret the will of heaven. This gave their criticism immense moral weight, though it often cost them their careers. or their lives. Most importantly, the conditional nature of the mandate of heaven provided a moral and religious justification for rebellion. A successful rebel leader was, by definition, not a usurper, but the new, rightful holder of the mandate. The very fact of his victory was proof that heaven had chosen him. This concept shaped the entire sweep of Chinese history into a predictable pattern known as the dynastic cycle. The cycle begins with the founding of a new dynasty by a strong, virtuous, and capable leader, often a peasant rebel or a great general who overthrows a corrupt old regime. This founding emperor works hard, institutes reforms, and restores peace and order. The empire enters a golden age of prosperity and cultural achievement. His immediate successors may also be diligent rulers. But over the generations, the emperors grow complacent. They are born into the palace, surrounded by unimaginable luxury and sycophantic courtiers. They become disconnected from the struggles of the common people. Corruption flourishes in the court, often led by powerful eunuchs or the families of imperial consorts. The emperors neglect their duties, spending their time on pleasure-seeking and lavish projects. This moral decay signals the beginning of the end. The government becomes ineffective. Taxes are raised to crushing levels to pay for the court's extravagance. Public works like dikes and canals fall into disrepair. Then, the signs from heaven begin to appear in earnest. Floods and famines create a desperate and starving peasantry. Rebellions break out. Warlords emerge in the provinces. The emperor, isolated in his palace, is unable to effectively quell the unrest. The widespread chaos is seen by all as definitive proof that the dynasty has lost the mandate of heaven. A new leader, often from humble origins, emerges who claims to have heaven's favor. He gathers followers, defeats his rivals and the weakened imperial armies, and eventually sacks the capital, overthrowing the old dynasty. He then proclaims a new dynasty, and the cycle begins again. This framework, from the Han to the Tang, the Song, the Ming, and finally the Qing, was the lens through which the Chinese understood their own history. It was not a chaotic series of wars and successions, but an orderly, cosmic pattern of moral decay and renewal. For the individual emperor, this meant that his throne was never truly secure. He was perpetually on probation. He lived with the knowledge that if he failed, not only his own life, but the lives of his entire clan and the survival of his dynasty were at stake. This knowledge profoundly shaped the weirdness of his existence. It was why his life had to be so meticulously ritualized. His every public act, from the symbolic ploughing of the first furrow in spring to ensure a good harvest, to the precise colors of the robes he wore for different ceremonies, was a performance designed to maintain cosmic harmony. There was no room for error, no place for spontaneity. His life was not his own. It belonged to the state, to his ancestors, and to heaven. This divine status was also the root of his profound isolation, a topic we will explore in greater detail later. Because he was the son of heaven, a sacred link to the cosmos, he had to be shielded from the mundane, profane world. He was to live in a series of nested enclosures at the heart of a forbidden city, his contact with the outside world, and even with his own officials, heavily filtered and ritualized. He was the most powerful man in the world, and also the most isolated, a prisoner of the very ideology that gave him his power. The mandate of heaven was both a crown of supreme glory and a cage of crushing responsibility, and every emperor who sat upon the dragon throne had to bear its immense, solitary weight. The emperor, as the sacred son of heaven, could not live among ordinary mortals. His person was too charged with cosmic significance, too vital to the well-being of the universe, to be exposed to the random defilements and chaotic energies of the outside world. He required a special environment, a purpose-built microcosm that was as ordered, as ritualized, and as hierarchical as the heavens themselves. This need gave rise to some of the most ambitious and breathtaking architectural projects in human history, the imperial palace complexes. While many great palaces existed throughout China's long history, such as the Daming Palace of the Tang dynasty in Chang'an, the most famous and best surviving example is the one that became the ultimate symbol of imperial seclusion, the Zijin Cheng, the Purple Forbidden City in Beijing. To understand the emperor's life, we must first understand the architectural philosophy of his home. The Forbidden City, constructed in the early 15th century by the Yongle Emperor of the Ming dynasty and serving as the imperial palace for nearly 500 years until the fall of the Qing in 1912, was not merely a large and luxurious residence. It was a diagram of the cosmos, a city within a city laid out on a perfect north-south axis, its every gate, hall, and courtyard imbued with deep cosmological and political meaning. Its very name is a statement of its purpose. City is self-evident. It was a vast, self-contained complex covering over 180 acres, containing nearly 1,000 buildings and, by some counts, 9,999 rooms, one less than the divine perfection of 10,000 believed to exist in heaven. Forbidden was its defining characteristic. No one could enter or leave without explicit permission. For most of its existence, the vast majority of the Chinese population had no idea what it looked like inside. It was a place of rumor and myth. The purple component is the most cosmologically significant. It refers to the North Star, known in Chinese astronomy as the Ziwei star, the purple star. Just as all the stars in the night sky appear to revolve around this fixed celestial pole, so too was the empire and all of human society meant to revolve around the emperor. The Forbidden City was therefore conceived as the earthly counterpart to the celestial pole, the terrestrial pivot of the universe from which the Son of Heaven would govern all under heaven. His physical location at the heart of this complex mirrored his central role in the cosmos. The city was a fortress of concentric enclosures, a series of layers designed to insulate the emperor from the outside world. The outermost defense was the city of Beijing itself, with its massive walls. Within that was the imperial city, a large district containing gardens, temples, and administrative buildings. At the very heart of the imperial city was the Forbidden City, surrounded by its own 35-foot-high wall and a 170-foot-wide moat. This created a profound sense of separation. To reach the emperor was to penetrate a series of increasingly exclusive and sacred spaces. Upon entering the main southern gate, the Meridian Gate, a visitor would find themselves in the vast expanse of the outer court. This was the public and political sphere of the Forbidden City, the domain of the emperor in his role as the great ruler. It was a world of stone, marble, and immense, sweeping courtyards designed to inspire awe and dwarf the individual. The scale is almost impossible to overstate. The courtyards are vast, open spaces, paved with stone and devoid of trees, so that no assassin could hide, and the full, prostrating reverence of thousands of officials could be displayed. The architecture is dominated by a trio of great halls raised on a triple-tiered marble terrace, which form the ceremonial heart of the empire. The grandest of these is the Hall of Supreme Harmony, Taihei Dian, the largest wooden building in China. This was where the most important state ceremonies took place: the emperor's enthronement, his wedding, the celebration of the new year, and the dispatch of generals to war. Inside, the immense hall is dominated by the dragon throne, an elaborately carved sandalwood chair placed on a high platform, surrounded by columns decorated with coiled golden dragons. When the emperor sat here, elevated above all others with incense smoke swirling around him, he was the embodiment of imperial power, the center of the world. But it is crucial to understand that he spent very little time here. This was a ceremonial stage, used only on the most significant occasions. Behind this were two other halls, the Hall of Central Harmony, where the emperor would rest and prepare before ceremonies, and the Hall of Preserving Harmony, used for state banquets and for the final stage of the imperial civil service examinations, where the emperor himself would preside over the nation's brightest scholars. This entire outer court was an overwhelmingly male space. It was the realm of politics, of bureaucracy, of statecraft. No woman, not even the empress, was permitted in this section except under very specific and rare ceremonial circumstances. The true home of the emperor, the place where he actually lived, ate, slept, and governed on a daily basis, lay beyond this grand public stage. A gate, the gate of heavenly purity, marked the threshold between the outer court and the inner court. To cross this gate was to move from the public, male, yang world of politics into the private, female, yin world of the imperial family. The entire atmosphere of the architecture changes. The vast, intimidating scale of the outer court gives way to a more intimate, human-scaled labyrinth of smaller courtyards, gardens, pavilions, and palaces. This was the domestic heart of the empire, and it was here that the emperor's isolation became most profound. The inner court was, in theory, the emperor's private residence. It was centered on its own trio of main palaces, mirroring the halls of the outer court. The Palace of Heavenly Purity, which was the emperor's traditional sleeping quarters for much of the Ming dynasty, the Palace of Earthly Tranquility, the traditional residence of the empress, and the Hall of Union, which stood between them, symbolizing the harmony of emperor and empress, heaven and earth, yang and yin. Flanking this central axis were the 6 eastern palaces and the 6 western palaces, which housed the emperor's vast harem of consorts and concubines. Life in the inner court was governed by a set of rules even more rigid and arcane than those of the outer court. The most important rule was that, with the sole exception of the emperor himself, no adult male was permitted to reside within its walls overnight. The security and administration of this vast domestic space, the serving of the emperor, the empress, and thousands of concubines, fell to the only group of men physiologically incapable of threatening the imperial bloodline, the court eunuchs. We will dedicate a full segment to these fascinating and powerful figures, but for now, it is enough to know that the emperor's private life was spent almost exclusively in the company of women and castrated men. This environment created a unique and deeply strange upbringing for a prince who would one day become emperor. From birth, he was raised in this world of women and eunuchs. He would have little to no contact with his own father, the reigning emperor, who was a remote and godlike figure. He would be separated from his own mother at a young age and raised by a team of wet nurses, ladies-in-waiting, and eunuchs to prevent his birth mother from accumulating too much political power. His playmates were not other boys, but young eunuchs. His entire understanding of the world was shaped within this closed, artificial environment. He had no concept of a normal family, a normal friendship, or the life of a common person. His world was one of silken robes, whispered court intrigues, and the absolute deference of everyone around him. When he ascended the throne, this isolation only intensified. He became the sun around which this entire universe revolved. Every aspect of his life was managed. He did not simply walk from one place to another. He was carried in a palanquin. He did not simply choose his clothes. A vast bureaucracy of eunuchs managed his storerooms of thousands of robes, selecting the appropriate attire based on the day, the season, and the specific ritual to be performed. He did not eat a family meal. He ate alone, a practice known as solitary dining. Dozens, sometimes over 100 separate dishes would be prepared for him in the vast imperial kitchens and brought to him by eunuchs. Each dish would be presented under a silver-covered lid, and before he could eat, a eunuch would insert a silver plaque into the food to test for poison. He would then take a small, token bite from a few of the dishes before they were cleared away. He was forbidden from showing that he particularly enjoyed any one dish, lest it be noted by an enemy and become a vehicle for poison in the future. It was a paranoid and lonely form of sustenance. The emperor's freedom of movement was almost non-existent. While the Forbidden City was vast, it was also his prison. He was strongly discouraged from ever leaving its walls. A trip to the Temple of Heaven for a crucial ceremony was a massive logistical and security undertaking. An imperial tour of the provinces was an exceptionally rare event that took years of planning. For most emperors, their entire world was the 180 acres of the Forbidden City. Many never set foot outside it for their entire adult lives. They knew the empire only through the filtered reports of their officials, reports that were often heavily censored to avoid angering the Son of Heaven. This gilded cage, for all its beauty and luxury, was a breeding ground for a specific kind of psychological pressure. The emperor had no privacy. His every action, from the moment he woke to the moment he slept, was observed, recorded, and commented upon by the eunuchs who surrounded him. The Kijushu, Chijuju, or diaries of activity and repose, were official records kept by court scribes who followed the emperor everywhere, noting down his every word and deed to serve as a historical record and a moral example for future generations. The most intimate act of all, the selection of a consort for the night, was also a bureaucratic process. The emperor would choose from a series of inscribed jade or silver tablets bearing the names of his concubines. The chosen woman would be bathed, perfumed, and stripped of all clothing and jewelry to ensure she concealed no weapons. She would then be wrapped in a quilt and carried on the back of a eunuch to the emperor's bedchamber. Eunuchs would wait outside, meticulously recording the time. After a prescribed interval, they would call out, and the consort would be carried away. The grand eunuch would then ask the emperor whether the union should be recorded by the imperial scribes as a potential conception. The emperor's sex life was not a private matter of affection, but a public duty of state, aimed solely at producing a male heir. This life of total isolation, constant surveillance, and suffocating ritual could have a profound effect on the emperor's personality. Some emperors retreated into hobbies, becoming master calligraphers, painters, or poets. Others, frustrated by their powerlessness to effect real change through a sclerotic bureaucracy, simply gave up. They would withdraw from their official duties, refusing to hold audiences for years on end, leaving the entire administration of the empire in the hands of their grand secretaries or favorite eunuchs. The Wanli emperor of the Ming dynasty famously went on strike for over 2 decades. Still others, unmoored from reality and with no one to say no to them, descended into sadism and debauchery, their every whim, no matter how cruel or bizarre, being indulged by the eunuchs who sought to control them through their vices. The Forbidden City was therefore both a paradise and a prison. It was designed to protect the emperor, to elevate him, to surround him with the beauty and luxury that reflected his divine status. But in doing so, it cut him off from the very people and the very world he was meant to rule. It created a man who had everything and nothing, who was the most powerful person on earth and yet had less personal freedom than the poorest peasant in his empire. The high walls and golden roofs of his cage were a constant physical reminder that the Son of Heaven was never, ever to be mistaken for a mere man. The life of a Chinese emperor was, from the moment of his birth to his final breath, an existence dictated by ritual. Spontaneity was a luxury he could not afford. Personal preference was a concept largely alien to his role. His daily life was a meticulously choreographed symphony, a series of ceremonies and procedures that had been refined over centuries, each one freighted with cosmic and political significance. To witness an emperor's day was to witness a living embodiment of the Confucian ideal of an ordered, hierarchical society, a society where every action, no matter how small, was governed by propriety. This unyielding routine was designed to ensure the emperor fulfilled his duties as the Son of Heaven, but it also served to strip him of his individuality, transforming the man into a function, an institution. The imperial day began in the silent darkness of the inner court, long before the sun had risen. Typically, around 5 o'clock in the morning, a team of eunuchs would enter the emperor's bedchamber in the Palace of Heavenly Purity, or, in the later Qing dynasty, the smaller hall of mental cultivation. They would move with practiced silence, their soft-soled shoes whispering on the polished floors. Their first task was to wake the Son of Heaven. This was not a simple nudge. It was a formal procedure. A designated eunuch would kneel by the imperial bed and call out in a low, respectful tone, "It is time to arise, Your Majesty." There was no snooze button on the dragon throne. Once the emperor was awake, the complex ritual of the imperial toilet would commence. He did not simply get up and get dressed. He would be attended by a small army of eunuchs, each with a highly specialized task. One team would bring a basin of warm, scented water for washing his hands and face. Another would present a silver pot containing a special blend of tea and salt for rinsing his mouth. Every object that touched the imperial person, the towels, the basins, the cups, was held on a tray by a kneeling eunuch. The emperor himself did very little. He was a passive figure at the center of a whirlwind of quiet, efficient activity. The most elaborate part of the morning was the dressing ceremony. The emperor's wardrobe was vast, a collection of thousands of robes stored in dedicated palace wings and managed by a large bureau of eunuchs. The choice of what to wear was not a matter of personal taste. It was dictated by a strict code based on the season, the particular day in the ceremonial calendar, and the specific activities planned. There were different robes for sacrifices, for court audiences, for banquets, and for private leisure. The colors were deeply symbolic. Yellow was the imperial color, reserved exclusively for the emperor. To wear it was an act of treason punishable by death. Other colors were associated with the 5 elements and the 4 seasons: green for spring, red for summer, white for autumn, and black for winter. The robe chosen for the day would be intricately embroidered with auspicious symbols, most importantly, the 5-clawed dragon, another emblem that only the emperor could display. He would be dressed in layers by his eunuch attendants. Undergarments, silk trousers, inner robes, an outer dragon robe, long pao, a ceremonial belt studded with jade and precious stones, and silk boots. Finally, the imperial cap would be placed upon his head, its design also varying based on the occasion. The entire process could take over an hour, a slow, deliberate transformation of the man into the icon. Once dressed, the emperor would perform his first official duty of the day, paying respects to his ancestors and to the various deities enshrined within the palace. He would offer incense and perform ritual kowtows, a small, private ceremony to reaffirm his connection to the spiritual world and his filial piety, a core Confucian virtue. Following this, he would proceed to the morning meal. As we have touched upon, this was a solitary and paranoid affair, but before he could eat, he had to study. This was the morning lesson. A team of imperial tutors, the most learned Confucian scholars in the empire, would arrive to lecture him on the classics, on history, and on the affairs of the state. Even a mature, reigning emperor was expected to continue his education for his entire life. He would read through the memorials and reports that had come in overnight, with his tutors providing commentary and historical precedents. The lesson was designed to fill his mind with virtuous examples from the past to guide his decision-making for the day ahead. Only after this intellectual nourishment could he have his physical nourishment. The imperial kitchens were a massive operation, staffed by hundreds of cooks and eunuchs. The emperor's breakfast, like all his meals, would consist of a bewildering array of dishes. A typical Qing dynasty breakfast might include various porridges, congee, steamed buns with different fillings, pickles, and numerous small dishes of meat and vegetables. The food would be served on imperial yellow porcelain, and the entire service would be managed with the same silent, kneeling formality as his morning ablutions. The main event of the day was the morning audience, or Chao Hui, Jiao Hui. This was the emperor's primary point of contact with his government. He would be carried in a palanquin from the inner court to one of the great halls of the outer court. Long before his arrival, hundreds, sometimes thousands of officials would have gathered in the vast stone courtyards. They would have been waiting for hours since before dawn, arranged in precise formation according to their rank and ministry. Their colorful silk robes and mandarin squares, embroidered badges indicating their rank, would create a stunning visual spectacle. As the emperor ascended the dragon throne, a hush would fall over the immense assembly. At a signal from a court chamberlain, the entire body of officials would perform the full kowtow, the sangui ju ko, or 3 kneelings and 9 prostrations. They would kneel, touch their foreheads to the stone pavement, rise, and repeat this 2 more times. It was a profound act of submission, a physical acknowledgement of the emperor's supreme authority. From his elevated throne, looking down on this sea of prostrating officials, the emperor would experience a sense of power that no other human being could know. The business of the audience would then begin. High-ranking ministers would present their memorials, formal reports or policy suggestions to the throne. They would not speak directly to the emperor. They would address the throne in a high-flown, literary language, and the emperor would typically respond with a brief, sometimes cryptic comment written with a vermilion brush, or simply signal his assent or dissent through a gesture to his attending Grand Secretary. It was not a debate or a discussion. It was a highly ritualized exchange. For a young or inexperienced emperor, it could be a terrifying ordeal, facing the scrutiny of these seasoned, powerful ministers. For a disengaged emperor, it was a tedious chore to be endured before he could retreat back to the comforts of the inner court. The morning audience could last for several hours and was the most mentally taxing part of the emperor's day. Following the audience, the emperor might attend to other affairs of state. He might meet with his grand council, a smaller, more intimate body of his most trusted advisors, to discuss sensitive military or political matters. He might spend hours in his study, reading through the mountain of official documents that required his vermilion signature of approval. Every major government appointment, every significant legal judgment, every major public works project, in theory, had to cross his desk. The sheer volume of this paperwork was staggering. A diligent emperor, like the Kangxi or Yongzheng emperors of the Qing, would work tirelessly, often late into the night, annotating documents with detailed comments, his vermilion ink a constant presence in the machinery of government. A lazy emperor would simply let the documents pile up or allow a trusted eunuch to handle them, a situation that often led to massive corruption. The afternoon was typically a time for what passed as leisure in the emperor's life, though even this was often structured and observed. He might practice his calligraphy, an art form highly prized among the educated elite. He might compose poetry or admire paintings from the vast imperial collection with his eunuch connoisseurs. He might take a walk in the magnificent imperial garden at the northern end of the Forbidden City, a beautiful but still enclosed space. If he had children, he might spend some time with them, though his interactions with his sons and daughters were often formal and distant. He was not just their father, he was their sovereign, and the strictures of hierarchy applied even to his own family. More of his afternoon might be occupied with the complex politics of the inner court, meeting with his mother, the powerful Empress Dowager, or with the Empress to discuss domestic affairs. As evening approached, the emperor would take his second main meal, another solitary multi-course banquet. After this, the business of the day was mostly concluded. The evening was a time of quiet and preparation for the night, and the night brought one of the most important and bureaucratized duties of all, the continuation of the imperial line. As we have noted, the emperor's selection of a sexual partner was a formal, non-private affair, managed by the eunuchs of the department of the imperial bedchamber. This sterile, joyless process, so removed from any sense of human intimacy, is perhaps the most striking example of how the emperor's personal life was subsumed by his dynastic duty. By around 9 o'clock, the emperor's day was over. The gates of the Forbidden City were locked for the night. A quiet fell over the vast complex, broken only by the footsteps of the eunuch patrols making their rounds. The Son of Heaven would retire to his bedchamber, to sleep and to gather his strength to perform the exact same symphony of ritual the very next day. This unvarying routine, day after day, year after year, had a deeply cumulative effect. It created a life of supreme order and supreme monotony. For some emperors, this structure was a comfort, a predictable framework that guided them through their immense responsibilities. For others, it was a soul-crushing prison. They were trapped in a golden hamster wheel, performing the same tasks in the same way as their father and their grandfather before them. The only escape was through illness, death, or a complete withdrawal from their public duties, an abdication of responsibility that often heralded the decline of their dynasty. The imperial day was a perfect reflection of the emperor's strange existence, a life of godlike power, yet devoid of the simple, personal freedoms enjoyed by the humblest of his subjects. To truly comprehend the world of the emperor, we must look past the dragon throne and into the shadows that surrounded it. For the imperial court was, in reality, two distinct courts. There was the outer court, a world of high-ranking ministers, scholar bureaucrats, and formal statecraft. And then there was the inner court, a private, secluded world managed by a unique and powerful class of men whose existence was central to the functioning and often the downfall of entire dynasties. These were the court eunuchs, the surgically altered men who, by their very nature, were the only males permitted to live and work within the emperor's private world. Their story is not one of simple servitude, but a complex tapestry of profound sacrifice, unique intimacy with power, and a degree of political influence that could rival that of the most senior grand secretaries. The institutional logic for the existence of court eunuchs stemmed from a fundamental, non-negotiable principle: the absolute purity of the imperial bloodline. The emperor's inner court was a vast domestic space, a city within a city, populated by thousands of women. The empress, a hierarchy of consorts and concubines, ladies-in-waiting, and their female servants. This was the imperial harem, the wellspring from which the next son of heaven must emerge. The certainty of an heir's paternity was a matter of cosmic and political stability. Therefore, the presence of any sexually intact adult male, other than the emperor himself, was an intolerable risk. Yet this vast and complex world required a massive staff. Halls needed to be cleaned, meals for thousands needed to be cooked and served, vast storerooms of silks, porcelain, and tribute gifts needed to be managed, and intricate gardens needed tending. It was a logistical operation on a colossal scale, requiring physical strength and a permanent administrative presence that could not be filled by women alone. The solution to this conundrum was the creation of a special class of male servant, one defined by a profound physical alteration that rendered them unable to father children. These were the eunuchs. The path to becoming a eunuch was a momentous and life-altering one, typically embarked upon by young boys from the empire's poorest families. For a peasant family facing starvation, the decision to have a son enter palace service as a eunuch was a desperate gamble. It was a choice born not of cruelty, but of hope. The hope that their son might escape a life of back-breaking poverty and perhaps one day achieve a position of comfort and influence from which he could support the family he left behind. The physical process they underwent was a difficult and perilous transition, a defining sacrifice that marked their permanent entry into the unique world of palace service. It was this shared experience of profound transformation that bonded the eunuch community together with a fierce sense of collective identity. Once inside the Forbidden City, a young eunuch would begin at the very bottom of a vast and rigid hierarchy. The majority of the tens of thousands of eunuchs who served during the great dynasties lived lives of anonymous, arduous labor. They were the cleaners, the lamplighters, the gardeners, the kitchen hands. They worked long hours for little reward, their lives almost as grueling as the ones they had left behind, only now lived within the magnificent but confining walls of the palace. However, for those with intelligence, ambition, or simple luck, a path to advancement existed. A eunuch might be assigned to one of the many administrative bureaus of the inner court, such as the Department of Imperial Wardrobes, the Directorate of Palace Delicacies, or the workshops that produced fine lacquerware and porcelain. Here, they could learn a trade and rise to become skilled managers and administrators. The most coveted positions, however, were those involving personal service to the key figures of the inner court, the Empress Dowager, the Empress, or, most importantly, the Emperor himself. A young eunuch chosen to be the playmate of a crown prince could form a bond of trust and intimacy that would last a lifetime. When that prince ascended the throne, his childhood eunuch companion would often be elevated to a position of immense personal influence. This proximity to the throne was the ultimate source of all eunuch power. While the great ministers of the outer court met with the emperor for a few hours during formal audiences, the emperor's personal eunuchs were with him day and night. They woke him, dressed him, served his meals, attended to his studies, and managed his bedchamber. They knew his moods, his secrets, his weaknesses, and his desires. They were his only constant companions, the filter through which he experienced his own life. The emperor, raised from infancy in this environment, often felt more comfortable and could speak more freely with his eunuch attendants than with his own family or his high-minded, judgmental Confucian officials. This intimacy gave them a critical power, control over the flow of information. A eunuch could decide which official's memorial was placed on top of the pile for the emperor to read. They could whisper a word of praise for one minister or a seed of doubt about another. They controlled who was granted an informal audience and who was turned away. In effect, they were the gatekeepers to the Son of Heaven. High officials of the outer court, realizing this, would often have to curry favor with the leading eunuchs, offering them lavish bribes simply to ensure their requests and reports reached the emperor's ear. This created a parallel system of power, a shadow court that operated according to its own rules of loyalty, intrigue, and graft. The most powerful eunuchs, often holding titles like Director of the Directorate of Ceremonial, became figures of immense wealth and authority. They commanded vast networks of spies and clients, both inside and outside the palace. They could engineer the promotion of their allies and the downfall of their enemies. Because they could not have biological children to form their own dynasty, they were seen by some emperors as being inherently more trustworthy than ambitious generals or ministers. However, they often created powerful families of their own by adopting other eunuchs, building clans that could perpetuate their influence for generations. The history of China is marked by a constant struggle for influence between the inner court of the eunuchs and the outer court of the scholar bureaucrats. The Confucian officials viewed the eunuchs with contempt, seeing them as ill-educated, greedy, and morally corrupt usurpers of legitimate authority. The eunuchs, in turn, often saw the officials as arrogant hypocrites who threatened their own privileged position. When an emperor was strong, diligent, and intelligent, he could play these two factions against each other, maintaining a balance of power. But when an emperor was weak, young, or disengaged, a power vacuum was created, and the most ambitious eunuchs would rush to fill it. During the late Ming dynasty, for instance, the eunuch Wei Zhongxian rose to become the de facto ruler of China, commanding a vast secret police force, brutally purging his political opponents and having temples erected in his own honor across the empire. He was, for a time, more powerful than the emperor himself. Such instances of eunuch domination were seen by Confucian historians as one of the clearest signs that a dynasty had lost the mandate of heaven and was sliding into terminal decline. The role of the eunuch was therefore one of profound paradox. They were brought into the palace to be the most humble and trustworthy of servants, their physical state a permanent symbol of their subservience. Yet, from this position of ultimate humility, they could achieve a level of power that was anything but humble. They were the indispensable gears in the machinery of the emperor's daily life and the architects of some of the most corrupt and tyrannical periods in Chinese history. They were the emperor's most intimate companions and his most effective jailers, the guardians of the gilded cage, who often ended up controlling the man inside it. Their silent, ever-present, and deeply influential role is one of the most defining and strangest aspects of life on the Dragon Throne. Beyond the gate of heavenly purity, in the labyrinthine courtyards and secluded palaces of the inner court, lay a world governed by its own strict hierarchies, its own subtle languages of power, and its own high-stakes political games. This was the domain of the imperial women, a community that could number in the thousands, all living in a state of luxurious confinement, their lives dedicated to a single purpose: serving the Son of Heaven and, most importantly, producing his heir. The Western term harem, with its connotations of exotic idleness, fails to capture the reality of this institution. The Chinese imperial harem was a deeply political, highly bureaucratized, and fiercely competitive organization where personal ambition and clan loyalty intersected, and where the birth of a single baby boy could shift the balance of power in the entire empire. The structure of the harem was a pyramid, with the emperor alone at its apex. Just below him were three of the most powerful figures in the inner court, and often in the entire nation. First and foremost was his own mother, the Empress Dowager, Huang Taihu. Her position was one of immense moral and familial authority. As the mother of the Son of Heaven, she was the embodiment of filial piety, the most sacred of Confucian virtues. The emperor was expected to pay her formal respects every day, to heed her advice, and to defer to her wishes in matters of family and court appointments. A strong-willed Empress Dowager, especially one acting as regent for a young emperor, could be the most powerful person in China. She commanded her own staff, controlled vast wealth, and could act as the ultimate matriarch and power broker, often working in close alliance with her own natal family to secure their influence at court. Next in rank was the emperor's official consort, the Empress Huang Hou. She was the only one of the emperor's wives who was his equal in rank, at least in theory. She was the mother of the nation, a figure who held a distinct ceremonial role alongside the emperor. Her selection was a major affair of state, often the result of complex political negotiations between powerful court factions and clans. The empress was in charge of the internal administration of the harem itself, a massive and challenging managerial task. She was expected to be a model of female virtue, dignified, modest, and fertile. Her primary duty was to produce the crown prince. If she succeeded, her position was secure. If she failed to produce a male heir while other, lower-ranking consorts succeeded, her position could become precarious, leaving her vulnerable to the intrigues of her rivals. Alongside the Empress Dowager and the Empress was a complex, multi-tiered bureaucracy of consorts and concubines. The number and titles of these ranks varied from dynasty to dynasty, but the system was always hierarchical. During the Qing dynasty, for example, below the empress were imperial noble consorts of the first rank, followed by noble consorts, fei, and concubines, pin, each with their own specified rank, stipend, and allotment of serving eunuchs and ladies-in-waiting. Below these were even lower ranks of female attendants, any one of whom might, on a rare occasion, catch the emperor's eye and be elevated in status. The thousands of women who populated the inner court came from a variety of backgrounds. During certain dynasties, an imperial draft would be conducted every few years. Officials would be sent throughout the empire to select thousands of beautiful and talented young girls, typically between the ages of 13 and 16 from good families. These girls would be brought to the Forbidden City for inspection by the Empress Dowager and high-ranking consorts. The vast majority would be rejected and sent home, but a select few would be chosen to enter the harem. For a family, having a daughter chosen was a double-edged sword. It was a great honor and could lead to immense political power and wealth for her clan if she became a favorite of the emperor. But it also meant their daughter was entering a gilded cage from which she would likely never emerge and which she might never even see again. Once inside the Forbidden City, a new concubine's life was one of routine, luxury, and overwhelming boredom. She would be given her own small courtyard or apartment within one of the side palaces. Her days would be spent practicing the arts considered appropriate for a court lady: painting, calligraphy, poetry, and music. She would play games with other ladies-in-waiting, gossip, and embroider. But all of this was simply a way to pass the time while waiting for the one thing that truly mattered: the summons. The call to the emperor's bedchamber. This was the central, driving competition of the harem. Every woman in the inner court vied for the emperor's attention and affection, for this was the only path to status, security, and power. The competition was fierce and could be ruthless. It was a world of shifting alliances and bitter rivalries. Consorts would form cliques, spy on one another, and spread malicious rumors. They might try to bribe the eunuchs who managed the emperor's schedule to have their own name presented more frequently, or to have a rival's name conveniently lost. A consort who was in favor would receive lavish gifts from the emperor, better living quarters, and increased prestige. A consort who fell out of favor could be relegated to a remote, undesirable part of the palace, a cold palace, Lenggong, to live out her days in lonely obscurity. The ultimate prize in this competition was, of course, a son. A consort who gave birth to a son instantly saw her status skyrocket. She would be elevated in rank and showered with gifts. Her natal family would gain immense prestige and influence. She was now not just a consort, but the mother of a potential future emperor. This, however, also made her a target. The history of the inner court is rife with tales of plots against pregnant consorts or their infant sons, stories of mysterious illnesses, convenient accidents, and accusations of witchcraft. The empress, if she was childless, would be particularly threatened by the birth of a son to a lower-ranking concubine. She might try to have the child officially adopted as her own, a common practice that would sever the birth mother's connection to her own son and consolidate the child's legitimacy under the empress. The life of an imperial prince was therefore often fraught with peril from the moment of his birth. He would be raised in this hothouse environment of female jealousy and political intrigue, surrounded by his mother's allies and his rivals' spies. The question of succession was often the most destabilizing issue for any dynasty. While the principle of primogeniture, the eldest son of the empress inheriting, was the ideal, it was often not followed. The emperor could, and often did, choose a favorite son from another consort as his crown prince. This created intense rivalries between the princes and their maternal factions. The princes would jostle for their father's favor, forming their own political alliances with officials in the outer court and powerful eunuchs. This could lead to vicious succession struggles, with princes plotting against one another, which sometimes erupted into open civil war upon the emperor's death. To avoid this, some emperors, notably the great Qing rulers like Kangxi and Yongzheng, developed sophisticated systems to keep the succession secret. The Yongzheng emperor famously wrote the name of his chosen successor on a scroll, which was then sealed in a box and placed high up behind the throne in the Palace of Heavenly Purity. An identical copy was kept on the emperor's person at all times. The contents of the box would only be revealed upon his death, preventing the princes from forming factions around a designated heir during the emperor's lifetime. For the vast majority of women who entered the Forbidden City, life was a story of anonymity and wasted potential. Thousands of women would live and die within the palace walls, having never been chosen by the emperor, sometimes without ever having laid eyes on him more than once or twice. They would grow old in their secluded courtyards, their youth and beauty fading, their only company being other women and the eunuchs who guarded them. It was a life of profound loneliness and quiet despair. When an old emperor died, his childless consorts and concubines were often moved to a special palace of widows, or in some earlier, crueler dynasties, were even expected to commit ritual suicide to follow their master into the afterlife. The imperial harem, therefore, was a microcosm of the empire itself. Hierarchical, bureaucratic, and bound by rigid ritual. But it was also a deeply personal and emotional space, driven by love, jealousy, ambition, and fear. It was a world where the personal whims of the emperor could have profound political consequences, and where the birth of a baby could be a more significant event than a battle won 1,000 miles away. For the emperor, it was the heart of his domestic life, but it was also a constant source of political intrigue and danger, another gilded cage within the larger prison of his imperial role. The formal public life of the emperor was governed by the rigid, rational, and hierarchical philosophy of Confucianism. It was a system concerned with social order, filial piety, and the proper conduct of human relationships. But beneath this veneer of orthodox statecraft lay a much older, deeper, and more mysterious current of belief. This was a world of magic, of alchemy, of portentous signs in the heavens, and of a desperate, all-consuming quest for personal immortality. The Son of Heaven was not only the chief priest of the state's official religion, he was often the chief patron and practitioner of esoteric arts that promised to unlock the secrets of the cosmos and grant him eternal life. This duality between the emperor as a sober Confucian sage and the emperor as a Taoist adept seeking to become a god is one of the most fascinating and weird aspects of his existence. Let us first examine his official public role as the nation's high priest. The emperor, as the intermediary between heaven, earth, and humanity, was personally responsible for performing the most crucial rituals to ensure cosmic harmony. This was not a duty he could delegate. His personal participation was essential. The grandest stage for these performances was the Tiantan, the Temple of Heaven, a vast and magnificent complex in the southern part of Beijing. Its design was a masterpiece of cosmological symbolism. The main buildings, like the famous Hall of Prayer for Good Harvests, are circular, symbolizing the roundness of heaven. The altars they stand on, however, are square, symbolizing the squareness of the earth. The entire complex was a sacred diagram of the universe, with the emperor as the vital link at its center. The most important ceremony took place on the winter solstice, the darkest day of the year. The emperor would prepare for this ritual for days beforehand, fasting and practicing ritual abstinence within the Forbidden City. On the eve of the solstice, a vast procession would accompany him from the palace to the Temple of Heaven. He would spend the night in the Hall of Abstinence, a smaller moated palace within the temple complex, purifying his mind and body. Before dawn, he would be led to the great open-air altar, the circular mound altar. Dressed in blue robes embroidered with dragons, the color of heaven, he would ascend the three-tiered marble altar alone. There, under the starry sky, he would perform a series of complex rituals, offering sacrifices of perfect animals, fine silks, and jade tablets, and speak directly to heaven, reporting on the state of the empire and praying for blessings in the coming year. It was a moment of supreme solitude and cosmic significance, the emperor standing alone as the sole representative of all humankind. Just as he prayed to heaven for its blessings, he was also responsible for harmonizing with the earth. This was expressed in the ritual at the altar of agriculture, Tan, located opposite the Temple of Heaven. Every spring, the emperor would perform the ceremony of the first plowing. After making sacrifices to Shennong, the mythical deity of agriculture, the emperor himself, with his own hands, would guide a plow pulled by an ox, carving the first furrows of the season into a sacred field. High-ranking princes and ministers would then follow suit. This was not mere symbolism. It was believed to be a necessary act of magical participation, an event that would galvanize the forces of the earth and ensure a bountiful harvest for the entire empire. These public rites established the emperor's formal spiritual authority, but behind the scenes, his relationship with the cosmos was one of constant, anxious listening. The emperor was surrounded by a bureaucracy of spiritual experts whose job was to read the signs of the universe. The Imperial Astronomical Bureau was one of the most important and long-standing government bodies. Its officials were not just astronomers in the modern sense, they were court astrologers and diviners. Their task was to meticulously observe the heavens, a practice known as Tianwen, or sky patterns, and to interpret what they saw. The celestial sphere was not merely a backdrop of distant lights, it was a divine scroll, a cosmic memorial to the throne upon which heaven inscribed its pleasure or its wrath. An eclipse was one of the most terrifying portents. A solar eclipse was seen as the heavens eating the sun, a direct attack on the emperor's primary symbol, a sign of his failing virtue that could presage a coup or the death of the ruler. A lunar eclipse was an attack on the empress's symbol. The appearance of a comet, a broom star, was believed to sweep away the old and usher in chaos. Sunspots were seen as flaws on the face of the emperor's celestial counterpart. Planetary conjunctions were read as omens of great political shifts on Earth. The astronomers would report these phenomena to the emperor in secret memorials, offering interpretations and suggesting ritual remedies. An emperor receiving news of an eclipse would be expected to demonstrate humility, perhaps avoiding his main throne room and eating simpler food until the danger had passed. This obsession with prognostication extended beyond the stars. Every strange event in the empire was a potential message from the cosmos. The birth of a deformed animal, a strange pattern in a turtle's shell, a river that changed its course, all were reported to the throne as portents to be deciphered. The emperor lived in a world saturated with meaning, where nothing was a mere accident. This constant need to read the will of heaven created a climate of deep-seated paranoia, but it also opened the door to a more personal and radical spiritual quest, the pursuit of physical immortality. While Confucianism offered a path to a kind of social immortality, being remembered as a virtuous ruler by future generations, Taoism offered something far more enticing: the possibility of becoming a Xian, an immortal, a transcendent being who could shed their mortal body and live forever in a paradise of clouds and mountains. This quest became a private obsession for many emperors, a secret and often dangerous counterpoint to their public Confucian duties. The search for immortality took two primary forms. The first, and most dramatic, was Waidan, or external alchemy. This was the search for the legendary elixir of life. Court alchemists, often charismatic and mysterious figures known as Fang Shi, masters of methods, would set up laboratories within the palace, experimenting with exotic minerals, herbs, and metals. They believed that by ingesting certain powerful substances, one could purify the body, halt the process of aging, and achieve eternal life. The most prized ingredient in these elixirs was often cinnabar, or mercury sulfide. Because of its unique properties, the silvery, liquid mercury emerging from the red mineral, it was believed to hold the secrets of transformation and permanence. Alchemists would spend years trying to create a potable gold or a refined mercury compound. The tragic irony is that these substances were, in fact, deadly neurotoxins. In their desperate search for eternal life, many emperors were slowly and systematically poisoning themselves. The most famous example is Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of a unified China in the 3rd century BCE. His obsession with immortality was legendary. He sent a fleet of ships under the command of a Fangshi named Xu Fu into the eastern seas to find the mythical Isles of the Immortals and bring back the elixir. The fleet never returned. He employed countless alchemists at court, and it is widely believed that his death was hastened, if not directly caused, by ingesting the mercury pills they prescribed. His famous terracotta army, an entire immortal bureaucracy to serve him in the next world, can be seen as a colossal backup plan, a testament to his desire to continue his rule for eternity, one way or another. But the obsession did not die with him. Several powerful emperors of the Great Tang dynasty also died from elixir poisoning, their reigns cut short by their desperate quest to extend them forever. The second, more subtle path was Neidan, or internal alchemy. This was a more sophisticated spiritual practice. It viewed the human body itself as a laboratory containing all the necessary ingredients for immortality. The goal was not to ingest an external substance, but to cultivate the 3 treasures within: Jing, vital essence; Qi, vital energy; and Shen, spirit. Through a disciplined regimen of breathing exercises, meditation, specific sexual practices, and dietary restrictions, an adept could supposedly refine and transmute these energies, reversing the aging process and cultivating an immortal fetus within their own body, which would one day emerge, granting them eternal life. The Emperor of China was, by any rational measure, the most powerful human being on Earth. His official titles were not mere honorifics, they were statements of cosmic and political fact. He was the Tianzi, the Son of Heaven, the Wan Sui, the Lord of 10,000 years, the supreme and singular authority over Tianxia, all under heaven. His written edicts, brushed in vermilion ink, were sacred documents capable of altering the lives of hundreds of millions. His most casual utterances were treated as immutable law. He was the commander-in-chief of the largest standing armies in the world, the final arbiter of all legal disputes from the rice paddies of the south to the grasslands of the north, and the sole sacred font from which all honors, titles, and appointments flowed. He could, with a single command, raise magnificent cities from the dust, divert the course of great rivers, and consign any of his subjects, from the lowliest peasant to the highest-ranking minister, to oblivion. This was a concentration of absolute power so total that it bordered on the divine. Yet, it is one of the profound ironies of history that this very omnipotence did not foster a life of serene confidence or untroubled security. On the contrary, it engendered a state of constant, pervasive, and deeply corrosive paranoia. The emperor lived not in a state of peaceful command, but in a state of perpetual fear. The dragon throne, the ultimate symbol of his authority, was simultaneously the most dangerous seat in the world. His absolute power made him the absolute target, a singular prize for the ambitious and a singular threat to the fearful. Every aspect of his life, from the food he ate to the conversations he had, was filtered through a thick, suffocating gauze of suspicion. To truly understand the emperor's existence, we must understand that his gilded world was a fortress built not just to keep others out, but to defend against the ghosts of treachery that haunted him from within. The sources of these threats were manifold, a vast and terrifying landscape of potential enemies. The external threats, while serious, were in many ways the most comprehensible. The danger of a mass peasant uprising, fueled by famine, flood, or crushing taxes, like the Yellow Turban Rebellion that fatally weakened the Han dynasty, was a constant concern. So too was the threat of invasion by the nomadic peoples of the northern steppes, the Xiongnu, the Jurchens, the Mongols, the Manchus, who throughout Chinese history probed the Great Wall, seeking to raid or conquer the wealthy lands of the Central Plain. These external dangers were tangible. They could be met with armies, with diplomacy, with fortifications. They were the known unknowns, the true psychological poison, the terror that seeped into the very marrow of the emperor's bones, came from within his own world. The most insidious threats were not from starving peasants or foreign horsemen, but from the smiling, bowing figures who populated his court and his own family. The emperor was surrounded by a sea of ambition. He knew that every powerful general commanding a frontier army was a potential warlord in the making, a new An Lushan, whose rebellion could shatter the dynasty as it did to the glorious Tang. He knew that every high-minded Confucian minister who spoke of virtue and loyalty could be the leader of a court faction plotting his overthrow. And most terrifyingly of all, he knew that the greatest danger came from those who shared his own sacred bloodline. This climate of perpetual, deep-seated suspicion gave rise to a host of elaborate security measures, paranoid rituals, and brutal political instruments that defined the emperor's daily existence, transforming his life into a waking nightmare of vigilance. The first and most intimate line of defense was against the threat of poison. As the Son of Heaven, the emperor was constantly receiving tribute from every corner of his empire and beyond: exotic fruits, rare teas, potent medicinal herbs, and culinary delicacies. Any one of these gifts, presented as a token of loyalty, could be a vehicle for a silent and painful death. This led to the highly ritualized and deeply paranoid system of the imperial meal, a procedure that transformed the simple act of eating into a clinical defense against assassination. The imperial kitchens were themselves a high-security facility, staffed by cooks and eunuchs whose backgrounds were meticulously vetted. The journey of a dish from the stove to the emperor's table was a carefully guarded chain of custody. Food was placed in special porcelain containers, which were then sealed in locked boxes, often with an official paper seal. Only a trusted, high-ranking eunuch could break the seal in the emperor's presence. But this was only the beginning. The primary defense was the ubiquitous silver test. Before any food or drink could be offered to the emperor, a thin plaque of pure silver would be dipped into it. The prevailing belief was that many common poisons, particularly those based on sulfur or arsenic compounds, would react with the silver, causing it to instantly tarnish and turn black. While its scientific efficacy was limited, it was a deeply ingrained and psychologically vital ritual. After the silver plaque came out clean, the process was still not over. For particularly sensitive dishes, or when the emperor's paranoia was especially high, a designated food-tasting eunuch would be required to take the first bite. This was a position of strange honor and mortal peril. The eunuch would consume a small portion and then wait for a prescribed period. Only after this human guinea pig showed no signs of distress, no seizures, no frothing at the mouth, no sudden collapse, would the emperor finally deign to taste the food himself. Even then, the paranoia was not set aside. The emperor was carefully instructed never to take more than a few bites from any single dish, no matter how much he might enjoy it. This was a crucial security measure. If he showed a particular fondness for a certain type of fish or a specific style of dumpling, an enemy could take note and spend months or years developing a way to poison that specific dish. His feigned indifference was a shield. The result was a dining experience devoid of all pleasure, a lonely and stressful procedure that reinforced his isolation and the constant mortal danger of his position. Beyond the dinner table, the emperor's physical security was woven into the very fabric of his world. The Forbidden City was an architectural masterpiece of paranoia. The high walls, the deep moat, the watchtowers, the legions of elite Manchu bannermen and palace guards all made a direct assault nearly impossible. But the true security system was not stone and steel, it was one of information, surveillance, and counterintelligence. The emperor sat at the center of a vast, tangled web of espionage, a spider feeling for the faintest tremor of treachery. His most visible tool was his official secret police. The Ming dynasty, founded by the deeply paranoid former peasant Zhu Yuanzhang, perfected this instrument of terror. He established the Jin Yi Wei, the infamous brocaded robe guard. These were not mere bodyguards. They were a hybrid of the Praetorian Guard and a modern intelligence agency, a secret police force that answered directly and only to the emperor. They existed entirely outside the established legal framework of the Ministry of Justice. Clad in their intimidating imperial yellow uniforms, they had the power to bypass local magistrates and arrest, interrogate, torture, and execute anyone they suspected of treason, including the highest-ranking ministers and generals in the empire. They operated their own prisons, which were notorious for their brutality, and became a law unto themselves, a force that was universally feared and loathed by the official bureaucracy. As if the Jinyue were not enough, the Ming emperors later established an even more feared agency, the Dongchang, or the Eastern Depot. This was a spy agency run entirely by and for the palace eunuchs. Because the eunuchs were part of the emperor's personal household and had unparalleled access to the inner court, they were often trusted more than the Jinyue commanders. The Eastern Depot became the emperor's personal Gestapo, a tool of pure political terror, infiltrating every corner of the government and society, planting informants, and rooting out dissent with ruthless efficiency. This created an atmosphere of universal surveillance. Every official knew that his words and actions were being watched. He knew that his own servants could be informants for the Eastern Depot. He knew that the friendly colleague with whom he shared a cup of tea could be a spy for the brocaded robe guard. This fostered a climate of profound intellectual and political cowardice. Officials were terrified to speak their minds, to criticize policy, or to form associations. Honesty was dangerous. Candor was treasonous. The court became a place of empty pleasantries, cautious maneuvering, and whispered conspiracies, where everyone knew that a single misplaced word could lead to their own arrest and the ruin of their entire family. This suffocating paranoia was most acute and most tragic when directed at the emperor's own family. He knew from the bloody annals of Chinese history that the greatest threat often came from those who shared his name. The throne was a solitary peak, and anyone with a claim to the imperial bloodline was a potential challenger trying to scale its slopes. The Yongle emperor, who built the Forbidden City, had come to power by usurping the throne from his own nephew in a brutal civil war. That historical trauma echoed down through the centuries, a constant reminder to every sitting emperor that his own brothers and uncles were his most dangerous rivals. They possessed a legitimacy that no minister or general could ever claim. An emperor, therefore, had to manage his own kin with a mixture of generosity and ruthless vigilance, often granting them lavish titles and estates in distant provinces to get them out of the capital, while simultaneously keeping their wives and children in Beijing as de facto hostages. The relationship with the crown prince was the most psychologically fraught of all. The heir apparent lived a cursed existence. He was the one man who would directly and personally benefit from the emperor's death. While he was trained from birth to be a model of Confucian filial piety, a deep and unavoidable tension always simmered beneath the surface. The emperor, steeped in paranoia, watched his son's every move. If the crown prince was too quiet and retiring, he was deemed weak and unfit to rule. If he was too charismatic, too popular with the ministers, or too skilled in military matters, he was seen as a threat. The emperor would begin to fear that his son was building his own faction, impatient to take the throne. This curse of the heir apparent played out in numerous dynastic tragedies. The great Kangxi emperor, one of China's most capable rulers, had a famously torturous relationship with his crown prince, Yinreng. He appointed him, then deposed him for his arrogance and plotting, then reinstated him, and finally deposed him for good, placing him under house arrest for the rest of his life. The personal agony and political instability caused by this paternal paranoia were immense. When all these defenses failed, when paranoia tipped over into active fear, the emperor would resort to his ultimate weapon, the political purge. This was not simply the arrest of a few conspirators. It was a terrifying political cleansing, a brutal campaign of terror designed to eradicate a perceived threat down to its very roots. The philosophical justification for this was the principle of collective responsibility, a dark reflection of Confucian family values. Since the family was the basic unit of society, the crime of one member brought shame and guilt upon all. Treason, the ultimate crime against the nation's father figure, therefore required the ultimate punishment. The Zhu Lian Jiu Zhu, Zhu Lian Jiu Zhu, or the 9 familial exterminations. This was one of the most horrific punishments ever devised by a state. When a high official was convicted of treason, the sentence did not apply to him alone. The authorities would systematically round up and execute his entire extended clan. The 9 exterminations included 4 generations of his paternal line, from his great-grandfather to his own children, and his maternal line, grandparents, uncles, as well as his wife's entire family. Every man, woman, and child connected to the traitor would be put to the sword. The goal was total annihilation, to wipe the traitor's lineage from the face of the earth, ensuring that no son could grow up to avenge his father, and to create a deterrent so absolute that no one would ever dare to dream of rebellion. The founder of the Ming dynasty, the Hongwu emperor, a deeply paranoid man who never escaped the insecurities of his peasant origins, unleashed a series of purges that saw the execution of tens of thousands of officials and their families, a bloodbath that terrorized a generation. The cumulative psychological effect of living in this constant state of guardedness and fear was devastating. The emperor was trapped in a terrifying feedback loop. His absolute power created enemies, real or imagined. His fear of these enemies led him to create instruments of terror and surveillance. These instruments isolated him further, forcing him to trust only a tiny cabal of eunuchs. And this extreme isolation only served to amplify his paranoia. He was a man who had no peers and could have no true friends. Every relationship was transactional, tainted by the vast imbalance of power. He was the lonely puppet master who constantly feared his puppets were coming to life to cut his strings. The greatest weight of the Dragon Throne, then, was not the gold and jade of the crown, or the burden of ruling a quarter of humanity. It was the cold, heavy, and crushing burden of universal suspicion, a weight that could warp the soul and break the mind of any man. For all his divine titles, the Son of Heaven, the August Sage, the Lord of 10,000 Years, and for all his desperate, clandestine quests for the elixir of life, the Emperor was, in the final accounting, a mortal man. The day would inevitably dawn when his cosmic mandate would expire, not by the judgment of heaven expressed in flood or famine, but by the simple, inexorable decay of his physical body. The death of an emperor was not a private, familial event. It was a seismic shock to the political and spiritual foundations of the empire. It was a moment of supreme national crisis, a dangerous power vacuum, and a profound disruption in the harmonious order of the universe. The period that followed, the elaborate rituals of mourning, the construction and provisioning of a grand eternal palace, and the perilous transition of power to a new ruler, was the final and most magnificent performance of the imperial age, a grand symphony of ritual designed to navigate the crisis, reaffirm the continuity of the dynasty, and guide the spirit of the departed emperor on its journey into the celestial bureaucracy of the afterlife. The grand departure did not begin with the final breath. It began with the first signs of serious illness, the first indication that the imperial vessel was beginning to fail. This onset of decline was the most guarded state secret in the empire. Within the vermilion walls of the Forbidden City, a silent, high-stakes drama would unfold. The inner court would be placed on a quiet lockdown. The great gates of the palace city would be sealed, with entry and exit restricted to only the most essential, high-ranking officials and the senior eunuchs of the emperor's personal staff. All normal court functions would be suspended. The atmosphere would become thick with a tense, whispered anxiety. The empire's most renowned physicians would be summoned to the palace, their silk robes rustling as they hurried through the quieted courtyards. Their task was a terrifying one, fraught with existential peril. They were to treat the most important patient in the world, a man whose body was mystically linked to the health of the state itself. They would employ the refined techniques of traditional Chinese medicine, meticulously taking the 12 different pulses at the emperor's wrists, examining the color and texture of his tongue, and inquiring about his humors and energies. Yet, every diagnosis was a political gamble, every prescription a potential death sentence for themselves. If the emperor's health improved, they might be lavished with rewards. But if he failed to recover and died, they could be held responsible for their failure and executed as incompetent charlatans. Worse still, if they administered a potent medicine and the emperor died shortly thereafter, they could be accused of regicide by poison, a crime that would lead to the extermination of their entire families. They were trapped in an impossible position, forced to act while knowing that any action could lead to their own ruin. Alongside these medical efforts, a host of spiritual remedies would be deployed. Taoist priests and Buddhist lamas would be brought in to conduct quiet ceremonies, to chant scriptures, and to create talismans to ward off the evil spirits believed to be afflicting the emperor's body. The emperor's official duties as high priest would be performed on his behalf at the great altars in a desperate attempt to rebalance the cosmic energies and win favor from heaven. Inside the imperial bedchamber, the air would be heavy with the scent of medicinal herbs, burning incense, and palpable fear. This room became the political nucleus of the empire. The designated heir apparent, if one had been named, would maintain a constant, exhausting vigil at his father's bedside. This was a critical performance of his filial piety, a public demonstration of his worthiness to inherit the throne. He would personally attend to his father, offering him medicine and broth, all while being watched by the assembled court. His grief had to be profound, yet his composure impeccable. Any sign of impatience or ambition would be noted by his rivals. And his rivals were all there. The other princes, his brothers and half-brothers, would also be present, their faces masks of feigned grief, their minds furiously spinning the intricate calculations of the new political reality. They would watch the crown prince for any misstep while quietly assessing their own support among the court ministers and military commanders. The Empress Dowager, the emperor's mother, would often assert her authority as the family matriarch, a figure of immense moral power. The Grand Secretaries and members of the Grand Council, the emperor's highest advisors, would hover nearby, ostensibly to offer comfort, but in reality to manage the impending transition, to ensure the levers of state did not fall into the wrong hands, and to secure their own positions under the new regime. The senior eunuchs, the emperor's lifelong attendants, moved like ghosts through this drama, their loyalties divided, their own futures hanging precariously in the balance. The deathbed of the emperor was the most dangerous place in the world, a silent, simmering cauldron of ambition, fear, and conspiracy, where a single wrong move could trigger a bloody palace coup. When the moment of death finally arrived, a precise and ancient set of rituals was immediately triggered to manage the cosmic and political shock. The instant the emperor's breathing ceased, all of the imperial consorts present, along with the princes, would let their hair down, wailing in a stylized performance of grief, and immediately remove all their magnificent jewelry and hairpins, the symbols of rank and joy. A senior eunuch would then perform the ritual of fu, or summoning the soul. He would take one of the deceased emperor's formal court robes, rush to the hall of the supreme principal, or a similar high point, climb to the roof, and, facing north toward the world of the living, he would hold the robe aloft and cry out the emperor's personal name 3 times, pleading for his soul to return to his body. This was not a mere formality. It was a deeply felt, magical act, a final desperate attempt to reverse the irreversible. When the soul, inevitably, did not respond, death was officially and ritually accepted. The eunuch would descend and lay the robe over the emperor's body, a symbolic act of final surrender. The next immediate step was political. An edict, written in advance by the Grand Secretaries and stored in readiness, would be brought forth. This document, written in the voice of the deceased emperor, would praise the virtues of his chosen heir and formally command him to ascend the dragon throne. This edict would be immediately proclaimed to the assembled court and dispatched by riders to the far corners of the empire. This was the single most crucial act in ensuring a peaceful transition. It preempted any debate or challenge, immediately legitimizing the new emperor and demanding the loyalty of the entire bureaucracy and military. The crown prince would perform a symbolic refusal 3 times out of humility before finally accepting the mandate. He was now the emperor, even as his father's body was still warm. While the new emperor consolidated his authority, the ritual of preparing the old emperor's body would begin. The lesser encoffinment, xiaolian, was a meticulous process. The body would be carefully washed with scented water by high-ranking eunuchs. It would then be dressed in an astonishing number of layers, dozens, sometimes over 100, of the most magnificent silk dragon robes, court vestments, and other ceremonial attire. This was not just for show. The layers of silk were believed to have preservative qualities. Finally, a large luminous pearl, a symbol of purity and a supposed magical preservative, would be placed in the emperor's mouth to light his way in the afterlife and prevent the escape of his vital essence. With these immediate rites completed, the empire was plunged into a period of official national mourning. The new emperor led by example, setting a tone of profound, all-encompassing grief. He and the entire court, from the highest prince to the lowliest eunuch, would trade their colorful silks for mourning clothes, sangfu, of plain, undyed white or beige hemp or cotton. For a period of 27 days, the emperor would not attend to regular government business. All officials across the empire were ordered to cease their normal duties. For a period of 100 days, no music was to be played, no festivals celebrated, no marriages conducted. The color red, the symbol of joy and good fortune, was banished from public view. The doors of homes and government offices were draped in white. This transformed the entire visual landscape of the empire into a monochrome expression of loss. The emperor himself would often retreat into a state of deep ritual mourning, eating a simple vegetarian diet, sleeping on a coarse straw mat in a Spartan mourning hut, and wailing at prescribed times of the day, a physically and emotionally grueling performance of filial piety that could, in its most extreme forms, last for the full 27 months prescribed by Confucian classics. During this time, the deceased emperor's body would be placed within the greater coffin, dalian, a massive, magnificent casket that was a masterpiece of funerary art. It was constructed from huge slabs of rare and fragrant wood, such as catalpa or the precious, decay-resistant nanmu wood, fitted together with intricate joinery. It was then lacquered dozens upon dozens of times, creating a thick, airtight, and lustrous shell, often painted with dragons and other celestial symbols. This great sarcophagus would lie in state in one of the primary halls of the palace, often for several months, resting on a grand catafalque. Day and night it would be surrounded by flickering candles, fragrant incense, and the ceaseless, droning chants of Buddhist and Taoist priests, their prayers intended to guide the emperor's soul, Hun, on its journey to the heavens and to pacify his earthly spirit, Po. High officials, members of the imperial clan, and envoys from tributary states like Korea and Vietnam would be permitted to file past the great coffin, performing the kowtow and paying their final respects. While the empire mourned, a project that had been underway for decades would be rushed to completion, the emperor's tomb. An imperial mausoleum was the most important construction project of any reign, often beginning the year the emperor took the throne. The choice of the site was a matter of supreme spiritual and political importance, guided by the intricate principles of feng shui. Armies of imperial geomancers would survey the landscape for years, searching for the perfect location. An auspicious dragon's lair with a protective mountain to the north, gently rolling hills like the azure dragon, and white tiger to the east and west, an open view to the south, and the presence of gentle, life-giving streams. This perfect landscape was believed to gather positive qi that would protect the emperor's spirit, ensure his eternal peace, and, by extension, guarantee the prosperity and longevity of his entire dynasty. The tombs themselves, like those in the Ming and Qing imperial necropolises outside Beijing, were not mere graves. They were vast, sprawling subterranean palaces. The approach to the tomb complex was along a spirit path, Shendao, a long paved causeway lined with pairs of magnificent, larger-than-life stone statues of guardian animals, lions, camels, elephants, and stoic civil and military officials who would serve as the emperor's eternal retinue. The tomb itself was a massive underground structure, a vault of brick and stone containing a series of chambers designed to mirror the layout of the Forbidden City. There was an antechamber, a great sacrificial hall meant to serve as a throne room, and side chambers filled with an incredible wealth of burial goods, Mingqi. These goods included everything the emperor could possibly need or desire in the afterlife. The finest silks, priceless porcelain vases, magnificent works of art, his favorite books and calligraphy brushes, his ceremonial weapons, and vast quantities of gold, silver, jade, and other precious stones were packed into the tomb. In the earliest dynasties, This included the brutal practice of human sacrifice, where consorts, servants, and guards were killed and buried with their master. This was later replaced by the more humane, but no less elaborate, use of lifelike ceramic or wooden effigies. The most spectacular example of this, of course, is the terracotta army of Qin Shi Huang, an entire immortal military bureaucracy designed to serve him. When the auspicious day for burial finally arrived, the final grand procession began. It was a spectacle of unparalleled solemnity and scale. The massive, heavy casket was placed on a colossal catafalque pulled by over 100 pallbearers. A vast, slow-moving river of humanity, tens of thousands strong, would accompany the casket on its final journey from the capital to the tomb site, a journey that could take many days. The procession was led by officials carrying banners, incense burners, and spirit tablets. They were followed by the new emperor, the princes, and other members of the imperial clan, all clad in white, weeping ostentatiously. The road would be specially prepared, covered in a layer of yellow sand. The air would be filled with the sound of wailing and the mournful music of bells, chimes, and flutes. Upon arrival at the mausoleum, final, elaborate sacrifices were made. Then, the great casket was slowly and carefully lowered down a ramp into the depths of the burial chamber. It was placed on a high platform in the central vault, surrounded by its countless treasures. Once everything was in place, the living would retreat. The last stonemasons and laborers would seal the tomb from the inside, swinging massive stone doors, some weighing many tons, into place. It was widely believed that these final workers were sealed in with their master, a final human sacrifice to ensure the secrets of the tomb's layout and its anti-theft mechanisms died with them. The entrance tunnel would be filled in, and a great earthen mound, the tumulus, would be raised over the tomb and planted with trees to disguise it and return it to nature. The emperor's physical body was now secure in its eternal palace. But his spiritual presence had one last journey to make. His official spirit tablet, a simple piece of wood inscribed with his posthumous temple name, would be ceremoniously installed in the Tai Miao, the imperial ancestral temple just outside the Forbidden City. Here, he would take his place among the ranks of his deified ancestors. He was no longer a man, but a permanent, sacred part of the dynastic lineage, to be worshipped by all his descendants for generations to come. With the tomb sealed and the spirit tablet installed, the period of national mourning would gradually draw to a close. The new emperor would formally adopt his chosen reign name, an auspicious phrase that would define the new era. The court would shed its white robes and once again don the brilliant colors of official life. The great machine of government would grind back into full operation. The grand departure was complete. The process, from the first failing breath to the final ancestral rite, was a powerful and public reaffirmation of the empire's core principles. It managed the chaos of death, legitimized the transfer of power, and transformed a mortal man into an eternal ancestor. It was a final, magnificent declaration that while the Son of Heaven may die, the Dragon Throne and the cosmic order it represented would endure forever.